Mirasee.
I really believe clarity of vision is the single most thing that has helped me. Being clear about what I want to do, what I want this organization to do, not how I want it to do, what I want to do. Because the paths to achieve that may vary.
Hi, I'm Sharon Richmond, and this is To Lead as Human. For not quite 40 years, I've run a business called Leading Large. I coach C-level executives to 10x their impact, clarifying their priorities, energizing their organizations, adapting their personal behaviors, and through this, building cultures of accountability and respect. In this podcast, we help you envision how to supercharge your leadership by introducing you to executives who lead with intention. These business leaders exemplify the principles of leading large. They know that as leaders, the positional power they have comes with an equal measure of personal responsibility. These leaders not only deliver stellar value to their customers, clients, and stakeholders, they also prioritize building organizations that provide purpose, meaning, and a healthy working environment for their employees. We benefit by learning from the challenges and successes they've experienced on their human journey. Today's guest is Vandana Kumar, who leads the India Currents Foundation as publisher and CEO. Established in 1987, India Currents is the oldest newsroom dedicated to covering the Indian diaspora of 5 million, the fastest growing population in the United States. The magazine ran in print form for 30 years and has been digital since 2017. Vandana has won the Asian American Hero Award from the County of Santa Clara and the Leadership in Business Award twice from the California Legislature Assembly. Under her leadership, India Currents won the Community Impact Award from the Asian American Journalists Association in 2024. Vandana, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sharon, for that very warm and generous introduction.
You are so welcome. So we're going to just dive right in and start with thinking back over your career, which is now almost 40 years. Not unlike my own. What comes to mind to you in terms of your biggest awakening as a leader?
You've told your listeners that we started in 1987. So that was the era of print. That's how you and I, and perhaps everyone of that generation, remembers newspapers coming to the door, magazines arriving and having a place on your coffee tables. And India Currents was that magazine of record for the Indian American community, especially here in the Bay Area.
The Silicon Valley area.
In the Silicon Valley. In around 2000, and perhaps later on, when with the arrival of Google and Facebook, the world as we knew changed. How we got our information, the speed at which you could find out something, the joy of connections. The internet allowed us these wonderful things that were not possible earlier. And as consumers, we were all beneficiaries, right? Even as businesses, there were a lot of pluses, especially in creating access. But along with that, it started occurring to me is, where is a place for a magazine like India Currents? Where is that place going to be? I'd say around 2010 or so, I knew that business as we were conducting was just not feasible for a long period of time. I follow the industry and I realized many people were struggling. And for us too, our whole revenue model was based on advertising revenue. And we were slowly but surely losing that to Facebook. And the villain in our story. But I realized we were not alone. So that thought had really been percolating in my mind, like, business cannot actually continue like this. Not just our business, really any business in the publishing world. And I realized that if we wanted to continue, we needed to embrace change. And that's a hard move, when people are vested in doing things a certain way. There are all of these things called the theory of change, who moved my cheese, and, books like that that tell you how to navigate that. We have a small newsroom. It's really us moving from desk to desk and saying that, hey, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. That was really the time where I realized, like, hey, this change is coming. And how can we prepare for it?
What did you have to accept or recognize or admit about yourself for that awakening to occur?
I recognized that we were seeing a massive shift in our lifetimes, and that repercussion would also affect our business. To think otherwise would have been to, sort of dig my head into the sand and say that, well, it's not going to affect us. I completely recognized that it was going to affect us. And even then, we started creating a digital version. It was definitely our stepchild, it was also there. But it got our team thinking about the fact is, well, there are people, who access this on something called the internet. So we must make sure that it's there. It was very primitive, but that's how we did it.
It reminds me of Professor Charles O'Reilly's long ago book that he wrote called The Ambidextrous Organization, with the idea that organizations that are undertaking change have to continue to run the business as it is while also incubating and cultivating a new version of themselves. So, how did your leadership have to change at that time?
I realized in order to lead a team, I needed to get buy in. And that means this needed to be a collaborative process. While I was the main person that was, getting the knowledge about, hey, which is the direction that we can move in. But I realized that when team members feel that they have say in the direction that we're moving, they really do come all in. They realize their input is valuable, which indeed it is. And Sharon, I have to say that our newsroom is very different from perhaps major newsrooms. It wasn't like we have a whole bunch of reporters and they're going out and covering the community. No, we just didn't do it like that. For the simple reason that India Currents was formed because it was a labor of love. This was not formed for a business reason. It wasn't formed by investigating the ROIs and a business plan. We didn't have any of that. I think about this today and it blows my mind that one can start a business like that. And of course, I didn't think at that point that we were actually starting a business.
What did you think at that time?
I felt that there was a void in our lives and we wanted to fill that hole. And one way of filling that hole was telling our stories in our own voices. And because while we were definitely growing as a community, our stories were invisible in the local news that I used to consume on a daily basis. And so the motivation that started the magazine is vastly different than perhaps other businesses, where there is a clear evaluation of what's the business going to take, what's the ROI on it? Is it worth investing in? For us, no. It was a labor of love.
And you were saying it was personal need. You were a young immigrant yourself into an area that was very foreign. So maybe tell us just a little bit about what was the personal need and then the community need that led you to the labor of love.
Yes, that's an interesting story because I came to this country in 1986. I came as an arranged marriage bride. I was married to a nice young engineer from my home country of India. But I was very lonely here. I knew nobody, including my husband,
Right.
but he was a nice guy. And because I felt lonely, I was constantly looking for other people like me. Because surely there were other people like me. Surely there were others trying to figure out how to do things in this new home country. Because I recognized this was my new home. How do people navigate here? Even though I knew the language, I didn't understand the accent. And how do I find out about anything? Say I wanted to cook something, foods that were familiar to me. Because you know what happens as immigrants, it doesn't matter where in the world you come from, you're always looking for the familiar in an unfamiliar land. And you're looking to create tastes, sounds, things that remind you of home. That's how you build a home, right? By creating that. So, because we could not find that in our local media, you have to remember the times, Sharon, that we got news through the newspaper. And if the newspaper told nothing about someone like you, then where do you get the news? Remember, the internet had not been invented then.
I remember that very, very well. And so it sounds like it almost started out as like a community newsletter.
100%. 100%. You nailed that. It was in a black and white newsletter, 4 pages or 8 pages, in which we put together the events that we knew about. But we found out what show perhaps would interest an Indian immigrant on radio, or if there was a concert of Indian classical music concert. Now, you also have to know that I knew nothing about Indian classical music or dance. But what excited me was this was something that came from my home country. And it didn't matter that I didn't know it, but it reminded me of home. And I think there's that sense of nostalgia, a sense of loneliness. I think the real word is loneliness, to think about what is any immigrant? It doesn't matter, again, where in the world they come from. You find a home or you make a home when you're able to create a home in your new place. And sometimes the things that were familiar to you, when you're able to recreate that in your new home, you're able to create a home. I've used the word home several times.
Yes. Well, so this is great. So, in what ways do you feel like starting the company as a new immigrant in the US, how did that affect the way you were thinking about leading the organization, even when it was just fresh and small?
Well, I'm happy to say that I wasn't alone. When we started it, this was actually my brother in law's idea. So, real credit goes to him. But he also saw how lonely I was. And he was like, wait, maybe you can help. Let's do this thing together. What did I know? I was young. I was, foolish. I was also pregnant. And I was just about to deliver a child. And my brother in law says, well, you're going to be at home and you're going to have time and maybe you can help. Now, remember, I've never had a child before, so I have no idea how much work it takes. I've never had a child in a foreign land, which I have no idea. So instead of having one child, I delivered twins.
You had two babies and you had the India occurrence.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
But again, I had to remind you, I was young and you have a lot of energy and you also don't know limitations.
Right? You don't know what you don't know.
You don't know what you don't know, and you don't know that this cannot be done. So, of course, it can be done. Of course, the babies are gonna, sleep at some point, and then we're gonna do this. And my role, to be honest, was also limited. I started with doing the events calendar, which was what got me connected to the community. So, what do you do when you don't have a database? What do you do when you don't have resources? This is the labor of love.
As I'm listening to you talk about it, I'm also remembering that one of the most recent Harvard Business Review, the cover story is We're Still Lonely. And what I'm so struck by, Vandana, is that out of your personal need, you created a way to build the community and allow the community to find its own center, which, unbeknownst to you, you became the hub of that community as you were raising the family.
So true, so true. I realized only in hindsight, Sharon, I can't say that that was our plan, that was our grand vision. No, everything we did by the seat of our pants. It's like, oh, we printed these newsletters. And now we put a phone number in there, and now someone called to say, hey, we want to advertise in this newsletter. It's like, oh, we need to have a price, for this. Oh, how much should we charge? How are we going to remember what to do? We don't have a database. Oh, and this is before Excel, spreadsheet. There was Lotus 123 for those times. But Arvind, my brother in law, he actually helped build a database. So we started putting that information in. So necessity is the mother of invention. These are adages that we use so loosely, but there's just so much truth in that. And what I discovered is just like there was a void in my life, in my heart, there was a void in the Indian American community, the Indian immigrants that were coming to the Silicon Valley. And we became the place where every month people gathered. That became the community hub. People were sharing stories, they were sharing resources, they were sharing, how to make their favorite Indian recipes using American products. And it became beyond our wildest imagination that how the growth happened. And then they became culture teachers, culture bearers, like music and dance teachers that said, hey, here is an audience that would perhaps appreciate what you're doing. And we want to advertise in there. We had so many advertisers. We had so many people reading the magazine. Our magazine really grew. And at our peak, we had like 30,000 copies that we were producing, printing, mailing, distributing, all at no cost to the end user. And all of that was possible because of small business advertising.
I think it's a throwback to I grew up in North Carolina, which is in the southeast of the US. And I remember that there was something called the welcome wagon. When a new family moved to town, there was this group of volunteers that would come and they would say, oh, welcome to the community. They'd knock on the door, they'd bring you cookies or, information about the local shops. And this is like the first step toward, I guess, that kind of a welcoming environment and a landing base, maybe. So I think that makes a lot of sense that out of your own needs, you created something that served the needs of a larger and now rapidly growing community. So maybe we just jump forward a whole lot and say, at a certain point, I think it was around, I think you said 2017, you decided that you saw the writing on the wall and decided that a print publication wouldn't scale further. And so you undertook to convert to digital around that time. And I'm curious, Vandana, how did that stretch you as a leader? And what was your greatest struggle in leading that conversion?
I think we did that in 2019. But, the writing was definitely on the wall. And for us, we were just somehow uh, pulling this along because we were too scared to make the change. And because, making a change to digital was not really um, just changing, it is not just adapting to the changing landscape, but, it was really rethinking about how we connect with our audience. How do we sustain our work financially? And this transition really demanded like innovation, it needed strategic planning, and then guiding your team through a lot of uncertainty.
And building on the earlier part of the conversation, building buy-in with your team. And that was probably quite different because you had people continuing to run the organization the way it had been, but you had to cultivate a cutover, if you will, to a whole new operating model.
Yeah, completely, completely.
And that's a challenge for even the most experienced leaders, much less someone who grew into the business along with the business itself.
Yeah, I'm definitely that character, Sharon, someone who just grew along with the business. And while I was very fortunate to have the support in the beginning of my partners, Arvind and Ashok, after that, then it was just me. And so I felt that there was that burden that I carried, and to think about this was our baby, and to wonder, like at 30 years, 32 years, we had had a good run. And do we call it quits and say that all our stories are now being told by mainstream media, and the digital media has arrived and anyone can write, etc., etc. So these were all things that I was struggling with. Uh, I told you one of the reasons we've been doing this is I feel really passionate about my work, and I think that comes across to anyone who works with me, that I definitely have the passion. And I've been really fortunate, Sharon, to have found teammates that believed in my passion, believed in my mission. I think I came to the idea of being mission driven much later. In the beginning, this was like a necessity. But at some point, we grow enough as an organization and we realize our role is more than just telling these stories. And if we as an organization or me as a leader, I'm able to convey that to my team, to say that we have to be focused on our mission. Our mission is to serve the people. The minute you let go of that idea, the minute you let go of what is it that you're striving towards, what you're driving towards, then you can flail. But if you're very clear, then you adapt, you embrace change because you're focused on that end, our goal is, how do I connect with my reader? And if you say that, then you say, it isn't just enough for me to tell the story. And so then uh, I have always encouraged that. And I also feel that I have been incredibly lucky to have found the teammates that I have had over the years. They really have to believe in the idea of serving the community, of producing content that's useful to the community. And in the beginning, we would say this was a utility. India Currents became a utility. So if new immigrants came into the area, we knew that they would go into the Indian ethnic grocery stores. We knew that. So to distribute our magazine for free over there, that's how they found out about what's happening in the area.
It's so fascinating that, we're kind of, as a broader culture now, there's so much conversation about loneliness and feeling disconnected and feeling adrift a little bit. And all this public press is lately about how do we rebuild connections and rebuild community. But driving from your own need, it sounds like you figured out how to create a culture at India Currents that would invite a people centric approach, not just serve our readers, but also how you managed and helped to develop the people that worked on your team, your employees. Maybe talk a little bit about that. How did you come to that realization?
Realization. Again, I'm going to say, I wish I could tell you that I went to this MBA class and I learned that. Everything came from real life experience. So I'm smart enough to learn from my mistakes and to recognize, we're all human. We're going to make mistakes. And I'm sure I have many along the way. But I also learned. So a lesson I had learned very early on is I wasn't going to make the same mistake twice. I would forgive myself by making one mistake, but the second time, not the same mistake. I make new mistakes. And even for the team, I hope that, they also think of me as empathetic, as an empathetic leader. I hope that that's how they think of me. But I have heard from several folks who have worked with me along the years, that one of the things they really appreciated was I never micromanaged. You know, if I gave somebody the responsibility, I trusted that they would do it. And I think for a lot of folks, that trust is very valuable. They want to live up to that ideal. It's like, hey, my manager believes that I'm capable of this. Even if I'm not sure, I believe in that. And it helps them rise to the occasion. And I've heard this, comment that several folks have said, um, and I mean, it felt good to me that, hey, this is feedback that I'm getting. So maybe, I've learned something along the way. Also, because we've been, an organization with small means, little means, but we're like the little engine that could. Because you see the number of awards we win, people are astounded at how small our team is. It's like, how do you produce that? And I think that really comes to the core that if you have folks that believe in your mission, they're driven by that. And, we have weekly meetings. And my job, I really feel, is just to remind people, hey, folks, remember, we are here to serve the community.
And also because you were bringing together a diaspora community, a community spread all over and far from home. So the basis for connection was there to begin with culturally. And then the service orientation sounds like it fed on itself. And I remember at a certain point, you were running short of funds. And how did you get out of that mess?
That is a very interesting story. Yeah. So, about the time that we turned digital, I realized I didn't have the funds. While I was willing to work for free, that's not something I could ask my team. It's like, hey guys, we've had a good run. We don't have the funds to continue business as is. So, I'm going to have to let everybody go. But my team said, you can't fire us. We're going to produce our work. You go figure out the money thing. I was like, what is this? But of course, I was trying to be as like, let you do the bare minimum that you need to do. But, we didn't essentially have a proper newsroom for, I would say, almost a whole year. And that's about the time when the pandemic hit. And we had already turned digital by then. And it was a chaotic year, chaotic. So The only thing that we had going in our favor was the fact that India Currents was a recognized brand name. And we knew what our core competency was, that we live in the Silicon Valley, right? They always ask you, what's your core competency? Well, our core competency was telling stories through a cultural lens that no one else could. And whether it's talking about how do you find childcare or how do you manage childcare and elder care, a lot of things that a lot of folks were navigating at that time, because this was also happening to me. So these stories were very personal. Anyway, I reached out to a local publisher, the digital publisher, and said that, how are you guys publishing in the digital world? Where do you make your money? Because the digital advertising is so little. And so he said that their readers support them. So I asked, like, a subscription. He said, yeah, subscription. I said, oh man, I have immigrant audiences. They're never going to pay. And for 32 years, I've been giving a free product. So, way to spoil your audience. But I said, they're never going to pay anything for this. They're just not going to. But he said, hey, what do you have to lose? If you've been around for 30 years, people are still reading you, maybe they will pay. So, with great effort on my part, because this was such a huge mental block that I could not ask my readers for money, I said, what do I have to lose? I'm going to send an email to all my readers, the ones that I had email addresses for. And I sent them an email saying, hey, we're hurting. And I cannot tell you. I mean, I sent it just feeling so scared, like, oh my God, I'm geared for rejection. I'm just, this is nothing is going to come. But we got $8,000 in the next 10 to 15 days. Now, granted, $8,000 isn't a lot of money, but it was $8,000 that we did not have. And more importantly, it showed me a path, a revenue model that I could pursue. And it also showed me that I needed to diversify my revenue streams if I wanted to continue, because I was really debating at that point, do we continue? Do we not? Do we not? But that brought home to me the point that readers still wanted it. They were willing to support us financially, and advertising at some point would come back. And maybe I would look for other streams. Because the minute you've opened one, when one door closes, a window opens. And when one window opens, I'm thinking maybe two other windows could also open. And I needed to explore that. And so we leaned into that. We leaned into the fact is, let's build a reader supported revenue model. Now, that's a model that we are still working on. I can't say that we have arrived at that, but where we have definitely succeeded in is building our audience. Where we've succeeded in is building diverse revenue streams, because we apply for philanthropic support. We continue to sell advertising. And now we see advertising is sort of having a moment again. And I feel confident that this is a path forward. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
In the MBA world, we would call it, product market fit. People will pay for the thing you're creating and they get value from it. And that, so even if they paid just a small amount, I can see how that would have been so encouraging at that dark moment.
Yes. Yeah. It's growth.
It is growth. So our listeners tell us that they really especially appreciate those open kimono moments, the revealing lessons that you learned in moments of vulnerability, and just thinking about your own growing pains as a leader. What do you think has been the most profound lesson you've learned that has improved how you lead people?
I really believe clarity of vision is the single most thing that has helped me. Being clear about what I want to do, what I want this organization to do, not how I want it to do, what I want to do, because the paths to achieve that may vary. That has, helped me, because once I had that clarity that we were not going to fold, I also started getting a lot of messages from my readers. They were coming mostly as emails, but we also got, physical, like postcards and letters from our readers. So the sort of a theme emerged from that. And I saw that people were writing that, when they first came to this country, it was time of uncertainty for them. And India Currents is where they turned for resources, for comfort, for community, and to connect with others like them, to figure out how others like them were handling this. And the COVID 19 was another such moment. It was a global pandemic for a lot of our readers who had deep connections to a foreign land, and that one that they were completely cut off from. And the fear and the anxieties, I think we all experience that together, but also that worry about what's happening to my family that's so far away. All our readers had that in common. How do you take care of someone who's far away? I remember my own case, like my mom's, when we started saying, it's like, do you have sanitizers? Do you have this? Do you have supplies at home? She uses a lot of medication. Can you make sure you have 3 months of medication? Can you make sure you have that? Like, we were trying to do all of these things. And these was common with all our readers. That there was that sense of community solidarity that we were all experiencing together. And I think for me, that moment was really pivotal because I realized that the community still needed in the occurrence. And I have to say that not just for me, but for our entire team, that just felt like it gave us a sense of purpose. And when you are purpose driven, every obstacle that comes in your way, you will find a solution. They're just things to get across. These are things to just overcome to get to your purpose.
The way that I often talk about that with my coaching clients is, what is your care? Or for the sake of what are you doing this? And that really is different than just kind of a purpose statement that says, we're here to provide the Indian immigrant community with XYZ. Really, the core, the care that you have built from is to ensure community. And that is bigger than a publication. That's bigger than a day job. It's a bigger, deeper purpose, something that, of course, you can invest your life energies into because that is why you are doing what you're doing. It's why you're here, is to build and solidify that community and lift it up.
Yeah. I felt like I was in such a privileged position to be able to hear that from people. How many people get to hear that? So I want this to outlive me. I want this to continue to help the community that we spend so much time and care in building and uplifting and offering them connections and resources. And I have to say that my entire team, my current team, really embraces that. Absolutely.
So I want to shift a little more personal for just a moment. You've written about the sudden loss of your husband to cancer in 2001, and you were a young woman still. You were under 40 at the time. How did that tragedy change you as a leader?
Well, I was 38, and I think it was a tough moment. I think it would be tough for anyone. I was working in a job that didn't support my lifestyle, but it gave me such incredible joy and happiness. I had two young kids. I mentioned that I had twins earlier. They were 14 years old and just finished middle school, heading on to high school. Difficult age for any parent. Also, confusion in my mind as to what should I do.
Yeah.
And thanks to, my husband had a life insurance policy. So I think of it as a gift from the beyond, that allowed us to continue to live the life in the home that I used to live in, provided continuity for my family, and allowed me to do what I love to do. And at that time, so many people were telling me, it's like, you just need to join the industry. You have tremendous skills. You'll be able to make so much more money. But that was not the driver for me. And the fact that I could be my own boss, the fact that I could choose my own journey, the fact that I could choose how I wanted to engage was much more powerful for me. And there was also that moment where I had to think about how vulnerable can I be? As a leader in a business, we are taught, right? You have to be strong, purposeful, don't show vulnerabilities, because they show your weaknesses. But I've also realized that when you are vulnerable, you perhaps show a path to many others. And I realize, you know what? I'm just going to lean into this. I'm just going to say what I actually felt. And what was hard, what was not. Because to pretend that it was all breezy was stupid, It was hard. And it was lonely to lose your partner, after we hadn't even celebrated our 17th anniversary, but we'd been together. I was suddenly the man in the family. But because I'd been running my own business, and there are some things that come instinctively to me. I'm an instinctive leader. I see a problem, I try to solve it. And people have told me this many times that whenever they have an issue, I'm a good person to have in a crisis because I'm calm. And I think that's one of my superpowers. I can be calm and I can take a step back. It's like, this is the problem. Let's take a step back and, not do something instinctively, because instinctive, those are just like tactical, something that you might perhaps solve, but it's not really the long term solution. So I was able to continue, not to go down that rabbit hole, Sharon. But the thing is, it gave me, again, having that clarity. Once I knew that I could manage with the resources that my family now had, I could continue to do this work that I loved. And I had opportunity to build on that. And so I come back to my clarity.
So, one thing that is true of every interview that I do, I like to talk about the power of language and how I believe language really does not just describe what we see, but create what we want to see in the future. And so, the title of this podcast is To Lead is Human. What does this title mean to you as a leader?
That's a very interesting title. And for the longest time, I think leaders have generally been perceived as remote, cold, one that take decisions in isolation. I grew up sort of with that idea, that's a leader. So when I had seen the name of your podcast, I said, oh, that's interesting. You actually bringing the human factor into it, which is leaders are also human. And with being human comes all its frailties. And to recognize your strengths as well as your weaknesses. I've been a very collaborative leader because I've also worked in the community space. So the very nature of that space is we work in collaboration. Setting direction is something that I still do. And I think any true leader who's successful is one that has built a pipeline of leaders for their organizations. People often don't think of that because they think of it as, am I creating my competition or am I insecure about my role? And I get that. But the more people you build up, you're actually building yourself. You have more champions that speak out for you. There are more people that will turn to you for advice. And when you come across an area that you're not an expert or you find is a weakness, there are people that you can turn to. And I think it's a complete win win.
Yeah, I like that too. So, as we're wrapping up today, what's a piece of advice that you would like to share with our listeners? Something that you think maybe needs attention in leadership today, in addition to what you were just describing, so that the listeners can be more successful as leaders and build workplaces that do have this human culture of respect and accountability in combination.
In 2020, another year, a year of big changes, I was also a part of the American Leadership Forum training. And it was there that I learned something and I have embraced now in my newsroom, which is everyone in the team is human. And so while our focus was really on numbers, for an organization that's in the business of words, our staff meetings are really all about numbers. And everything has to be quantified because that's how we measure success today. But I learned through my American Leadership Forum training the idea of being vulnerable and the idea of giving space before we jump into work. So, when you start a staff meeting, are there things that you want people to share? Is there an open space where people can bring their thoughts to, or perhaps share something personal? So it doesn't feel like it's only work, because our personal experiences shape the people that we are, shape the person that shows up at a meeting at any given time. So I don't know if it is too new agey, but you allow their team members to be human and also At the same time, be purpose driven. I don't think the two of them are completely separate things. You can be human and still be purpose driven.
Yeah, and you can still run a very successful organization as you have demonstrated. So thank you so much, Vandana, for joining me today and talking about your journey and the moments that you had challenges to face and the perspectives that you've created from that. I am sure some listeners will want to know how to stay up to date on what you're doing. So what is the best way for people to follow you or find you, should they be interested?
Well, I'm very easy to find, Sharon. They can go to indiacurrents.com and our contact info is there. I'm available on LinkedIn. I'm available on Facebook. Search by Vandana Kumar or India Currents. You'll find me. For readers who are interested in staying in touch with our stories, we offer a free newsletter. Go to our website and sign up.
Terrific. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join me on the show. It's been such a pleasure and joy to meet you and talk with you.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for inviting me to the show. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Please stay with us for a moment, and I'll share some takeaways and coaching tips to help you uplevel your own leadership, starting right away. In speaking with Vandana, I was struck by how her experiences parallel so many early stage companies. Her leadership grew along with the organization and its needs. She began with a personal need, found out it was shared by others, and discovered product market fit really quickly with a community of customers. As she and the community grew, she paid close attention to how her audience, the customers' needs changed as the world and the environment around them changed. She led her team to adapt through experimentation as they anticipated and adjusted, addressing technological changes in the field when they decided to go digital, then learning that they actually could charge their audience, we'll come back to that, and ultimately restructured into a not-for-profit 501c3 organization so they could ultimately become self-sustaining. Maybe you're not a startup executive, but you can apply Vandana's techniques yourself. First, know the why behind your why and test this with your colleagues and your customers. She began with the why of, I don't know where to buy the foods I need, and discovered that the why behind the why was to provide a meeting hub for a community of expat Indian Americans. The deepest driver of India Current's success is their unwavering commitment to addressing their audience's changing needs. Second, build a team that is so deeply committed to that why that they will stick with you through the tough times. The proof for Vandana was when her employees refused to leave the organization when she lacked cash to pay. They'd rather continue working for no pay and trusted her to, quote, figure out the money stuff. This level of trust fueled their shared commitment. How do you do this? First, screen and hire slowly and don't settle. It's so tempting to just hire someone to fill a short-term need, but choose the people that will be with you for the long haul. And then to sustain this, maybe start your meetings as Vandana did with an opportunity for, quote, clearing, a chance for everyone to clear whatever else is in their minds at the start of a meeting so they can fully engage in each conversation. Lastly, and most importantly, challenge your own assumptions, as Vandana did. Remember, she said she did not believe that people who'd been receiving their product for free would ever pay to receive it. She asked a few, she received unsolicited notes and listened to the needs of that audience, and then she was willing to test her assumption, which luckily turned out to be false. Engaging your leadership team to do the same, identifying what your limiting assumptions and beliefs are, and then develop tests for them. Engage your leadership team to do the same. Identify any limiting assumptions and beliefs that you all hold. Challenge those and find ways to test them. I'm Sharon Richmond, and this has been To Lead is Human. You can find out more about me at leadinglarge.com. That's LEADING large.com. To Lead is Human is part of the Mirasee FM podcast network. which also includes such shows as Once Upon a Business and Making It. This episode was produced by Andrew Chapman. Danny Eni is our executive producer, and Marvin Del Rosario is our audio editor. Make sure you don't miss upcoming episodes by following us on Mirasee FM's YouTube channel or on your favorite podcast player. If you learned anything useful today, please take a minute, leave us a starred review, and tell one of your colleagues about the podcast. The more leaders we can reach, the better for everyone. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time on To Lead as Human.